merupakan kesinambungan perbincangan, perkongsian dan hasil penelitian yang dilihat dari pameran Kuala Lumpur Biennale yang junung-junung kali ini diadakan di Malaysia. Hari ini kita berkumpul bagi mendengar sendiri penelitian dan buah fikir dari ahli panel yang bijaksana tentang apakah impaknya Biennale ini kepada khalayak amnya dan perkembangan seni visual khususnya. Majlis mengucapkan terima kasih di atas kehadiran penggiat-penggiat seni, kolektor seni, pensyarah, pelajar daripada UPSI, pengkritik seni dan juga rakan-rakan media yang dikasihi. Untuk makluman, kita ada di sini Profesor Datuk Salma Abu Bakar Mansor, kita ada Cik Sabaria, kita ada Saudara Bojin dari IEXPO, kita juga ada Dr. Melanie daripada Indonesia, merupakan seorang kolektor seni, dan kita ada Datuk Azman di sini. Terima kasih sekali lagi di atas kehadiran. Dan bagi memulakan simposium kita pada hari ini, majlis dengan sukacitanya menjemput Encik Leon Leong selaku panel pertama dan juga Dr. Biyu Wahwano selaku panel kedua, diiringi oleh Saudara Faizal Siddiq selaku moderator ke hadapan pentas utama bagi memulakan sesi diskusi mengenai belas warisan. Dengan segala hormat yang dipersilakan.
Assalamualaikum, very good morning to the ladies and gentlemen. Today we welcome for coming for this session. Today I will introduce you to more panel on the Pillar of Heritage. In my left side we have Dr. Wiyu Wihorno from Jakarta, Indonesia, and Leong Leong is one of the artists in Kerala. Now his work was shown in the level 2. Okay. For the first panel, I will introduce you Dr. Wiyu Wihorno. Dr. Wiyu Wihorno born in Jakarta and he has lived in Berlin, Germany for 20 years. He graduated his PhD in plastic technology with highest honor from the Technical University Berlin, Germany. He was lecturer in Technical University Berlin and was an industrial consultant in Germany. He has started collecting art in the year of 1990 and part of his art collection has been exhibited in Indonesia, National Gallery Singapore, Hong Kong Art Center, Song Eugene Art Space, Seoul, Korea, National Museum Liechtenstein, National Society Museum New York, and so on. Wiyu Wihorno has participated in over 50 art talks, including he part of the Board of Jury in Bandung Contemporary Art Award, Board of Jury Video Art Competition, Bazaar Art Jakarta, Honorary Board of Patron in Singapore Art Fair, Board of Young Collectors in Art Stage Jakarta, and he was also nominated for the Best Collector 2017 by Art Stage Jakarta. And our next panel, Leong Leong. Leong Leong was born in 1971 in Perak. He has perspective in Spanish literature, communication, design, and education. Since several years, Leong has returned to his true calling as fine artist. His solo exhibition entitled Mystic Melancholic in 2015 in Richard Koch Fine Art was a series of narrative painting with meticulous compositions inspired by Sigmund's stay in Istanbul, right? Turkey. Yeah. Crack in the Wall, Biennale Level 3, was first shown in part as in situ open studio exhibition alongside photographic works by artist Mr. Fu. Okay. For the 15th minute, I will give panel to represent the slide, and for the second round, we have a Q&A. Okay, we start with Young.
an article from Malaysia.my, and it says the place is going to be demolished. That was in November 2016. It's going to be demolished in March. So I have only 4 months to experience the space. So I went there and I spent half a day. There's 15 blocks of the flats, 15 blocks. It's quite a big place, a lot of green spaces, you can see trees and parks. So, and I spent half a day. I went home and I cried. The next day I went back, maybe to find out why I cried the first day again. If you look at it, by the second day I've already decided I want to do something about Razak Mansion, because there's not a lot of documentation about this place. And if you have a chance to visit the place, it's an amazing place. I mean, the people were so friendly. Razak Mansion has been around for 50 years. It was built in the 60s by Tun Razak in 1967, inaugurated the place, officiated the place. And if you imagine a place that's been living for over 50, 60 years, with 15 blocks, with 3 generations of people, there's something there. And that's something that makes me feel I need to do something about this place before it's gone. But one thing I was sure that day, I don't want to just take picture, go home and paint it. It's about the place is so complex. Yeah, the people, the community, the space. It's not just about the people, and it's not just about the place. It's actually people and place, and over so many generations. I want to capture them. I suppose I want to capture a way of life, how people live in this particular place. Yeah, it's almost like a tradition and culture. So I went back the third day, and I went back the 4th day, and by the 10th day, I found a unit to rent, and that's my studio, and those are my new neighbors. One of the series that you see one of the series, I have 4 series in my work. You can see the first series you can see is I call it the Pegboard series. Why Pegboard? A lot of people ask me. Pegboard is the board with all this tiny little hole. That's the facade. That's the facade of Razak Mansion. In architecture, they call it the skin of the building. It's on the outside. Yeah. And this is very brutalist. Okay? In architecture, they call it brutalist. They had it all the way up to cover and to protect, basically, the building on the inside, how people live. That's the Pegboard, yeah? And those are the kids they were climbing up. We call it, in French, they call it Bres Soleil. Basically, it's called sunbreaker. It breaks up the sun from. We know that tropical climate is very harsh. You know, the rain can. So this blocks out the sun, blocks out the rain, and it also blocks out the dust. It blocks out people looking directly into your apartment. But when you look up, you can see people walking by through this neighborhood. I suppose if you live there for 50 years, day in, day out, you would. It's something that I feel when I paint it on the Pegboard, it feels the same way. It echoes that kind of, it's inspired me to paint it on the Pegboard. But painting on the Pegboard was very challenging because I had to seal up all the holes, prime it, forgive my collection. I mean, it has to last. But the more challenging thing for me was to paint my subject live. For very practical reason, because I don't have a lot of time. I have only, that time I know they're going to move out in March, so I have only 4 months in order to do as much as I can. I was really freaking out. I mean, I was like, and people ask me, what is your method? I said, I have no bloody method, you know, because it's like, they're moving, you know, and there's so many people, and I have to know them because I don't want to take a picture of somebody that looks nice, you know, and then paint it. It's not enough meaning, it's not enough challenge for me. I want to get to know them. So, but I don't have the luxuries of time to know them for too long a time and then start painting. So what I did was I paint them while I try to get to know them. I bring my easel, I bring my my canvas, my walls, go into their room. The wonderful thing is these people in Razak Mansion, if you've been there, you probably would feel the same way. They are amazing people. They let me into their house. I mean, the first time I met them, and Pakcik and Makcik basically leave me with the key when they go out So I was like, the second day, I went back to their house. I got the key from behind the door, and I opened the door. They were already out. They told me, you know, the key is behind the door. So I went in my heart. I was like, it's amazing, you know, people trust me in that way. So it was a very good experience. And also, because what I want to paint is just not people. What I want to paint is just not the Razak mentioned. I want to paint both of them. This is how people grow up in that area, in that building, in that compound. I want to capture that. So for me to paint live, I can go very close up to that. You know, because the house is very compact and there's a lot of stuff over so many years, so they simpan all the stuff, and then it was a lot of, I mean, some houses very messy, some houses very clean, but, and it's not a house that I'm familiar with, so I have to go there, and then somehow, what is that? If you take a picture, probably you won't know what that thing is. Yeah. I also want to see it with my own eyes. So if you look at yeah, like just now, the kids was adding to the fun of the painting, because it's just keep paint me, you know. I'm painting her arms, you know, and the aunt was literally, and I made her stand right in front of me. I was standing here. She was looking at me. I was looking at him. I don't really know. I only know her name, but there was so much energy. It was really interesting. We just look at each other, like, you know, and it just really get my attention. And of course, after that, I have to paint him, and I have to paint his sister, the niece. It was a very small place. Razak mentioned the one-room apartment has only 30 square meter, which is about 400 square feet. It's very small, and I don't have a lot of place. And I'm actually macam gangguan, right? She was cooking. I was standing there by the entrance. I put the easel on top of the washing machine, and then behind it is the toilet. So this is like a panorama, you can see more. And she was cooking, and it's like, it smells really good, you know what I mean? So after that, I got no place to eat, and she basically feed me with the food too in the end. That was a good feeling. But what I want to say is, if you look at a person this close, if I look at Faisal or a doctor, I will see his face. It's very hard. If you use a camera, you see his face, you won't be able to see his shoes. But with our eyes, we can see a bit of the shoes, a bit. Yeah? And if you want to see, you don't have to tilt your head. Your eyes can roll down a little bit, and you can roll on the side. So the way our eyes capture is very different from camera. I think all of us, if you're in visual arts, you will know David Hockney did the whole thing of that. But because Razak Mesha is very small, what I want to capture, especially the space where the people live in it or work in it, I want to capture as much as I can. If you use camera, you go back, or you have to use a fish eye. That is too much distortion to me. So I want to paint live because of that. I can see a lot more. I can literally see the toilet while I was looking up. Septi is standing here, but I can see a bit of the toilet even though it's on the side. You know. So, and I can see through her room to the balcony outside, and she's looking into the room that Kakri, just now the lady, stayed. So all of these things I was able to capture with just standing there. As much as I can, because as much as this is art, it is also a part of documentation for me. I'm worried that a few months later, this will be all gone, and no matter how we talk about it, it won't be there, and you won't be able to know it. So. And then I also painted the shops. There were a few shops. It was probably trickier. It's about his mother was also selling cigarette there, and she doesn't like me. So, but he's the tauke, so I said he's a good friend, you know. So he let me paint it stay on. And if you look at it, the cement floor has been around for 50 years. If you've been to some old houses, if you look at the cement floor, people have been walking on it, and macam kilat-kilat. It was just, and if you get a picture, you won't be able to see the texture of it, or the color of it, the nuance. So what I want to is also to capture all of those things. You know, when you see there's 50 shades of grey, and you can literally say, oh, this is a bluish grey, this is a reddish grey. But photo is change all those things. that was part of the reason. But I suppose the most important thing to paint them live is to, I feel it's a collaboration. This is not my project alone. This is our project. And for them, they embrace that, because for them it's like, yeah, paint my house, paint me and my husband. Of course, some people say no, I don't want it to be. But most of the people, and I think it's a collective effort. And when I paint halfway, they look at it, they smile, they feed you with their food or whatever. I feel it's validated. I feel it's an effort that has been approved by them. So it is a good feeling, I suppose. What else, I mean, that's a bad thing to feel as an artist when you finish something. Margie was probably the toughest client, She said, no, I don't want to sit there, I want to sit here. So it's much of a collaboration, I mean, there was, and it's valid, because it's not us going to your house and stand there, put this one on or that. We're not doing commercial photography, we are doing live, and it's very important. And it took a while to take out the Tudor, because I love her fiery hair. And look at the house, I call it the house of Chora. There's so many patterns, yeah? And all this pattern, you have to be there. I feel this is a museum for me already. I have only, so by the time in March, they delayed 2 more months. In May, that's when the demolition starts. By then I can't, everybody left. There was only me in this 15 blocks of block and along the rest. And then I have all this blank wall. So my fellow artist Lisa reminded me, like, saying, you came in here, you feel Razak mentioned it's like a dragon. I mean, it is a big block with winding blocks and whatever, different blocks, but I see it as one. And it's like this dragon that has been around for over 60, 50 years. It's been protecting the people living in it. It has a history of its own. So he said, why don't you do something? I didn't want to paint the dragon at first, but I have no time. Again, so I just do whatever that I could do. And there's all this blank wall. I've never done a mural before. I always paint on canvas. So I started with the interior wall, and the next day I got braver. So I went out, and that was block 8. By this time, the demolition started on the first, the few block on the other end. You can see boom, 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 boom. And then hear this crazy person who's just dancing, and then the contractor will come in, they will laugh at me, Supposedly I'm not allowed to go in, they're hoarded out of the place, but they let me in. It's just, and then I go in, and then again. And they all come, when they take a break, they'll come in and look at the painting. What I was happy to, my friend suggested that I do some tracing, some transferring. We use some parchment paper, put it on top, and then this is the work that you can see upstairs on the 2nd floor. Yeah? So this is the direct transfer from the dragon that I feel at that time. I felt it because after I painted a few more hours, my phone fell down, it cracked, so it's called cracks in the phone. And I fell into a manhole. I thought maybe I should have just, prayed to the dragon, to the Naga first before I painted. So there was some experience, but it was a very fulfilling one. I started with the triptych. Triptych as in the 3 pieces of work, the bigger work. But when I first started it, halfway I was stuck because I don't know how to fill in the content. Because it's not just the building, it's the people. And at that time when I first started, I don't know that many people. I don't feel I'm confident to tell the stories. Later on when this is how I started with the studies, and that's my assistant, Nasrika. They don't own a unit in Razak Mansion, so they were transferred out to PPR in Bukit Jalil, which is very far away. I actually went there to see him. Razak Mansion is 4-story. The new block, they moved the people about 1 kilometer behind, across the river, which is still very good because they didn't uproot you and put you to another tamak. So they are still in Jalan Sungai Bersih. The new block is about 15 stories, about 3 blocks. They have 15 of it, 4 stories, walk up. Now they have lift, they have new environment. It's 3-room apartment, it's bigger. So the people is not really complaining in a way, but they say, sayang lah. Yeah, I mean, you talk to everyone, everyone's like, it here for so long. You know, I mean, yes, the new place is better, and they have no choice because it's a DPKL land. They have to move. The new replacement of where Razak mentioned is going to be 12 blocks of 48 stories. From 4 stories, it's going to be 48 stories. We'll see. To me, this is like then I start to feel in the memory that I have. This is when I have a new deadline, which is the Finale. That was in the 2nd November, the next November. So exactly the project turned out to be 1 year. And if you can see there, that's Majid having her lunch. Majid is usually out. Majid is always restless. He can't sit still. They were having some disagreement, and while I was painting outside at the balcony, she would complain to me a bit, but now I think they're very happy. Just old couples that having a bit of a disagreement at the time. If you can see here, that's Atun. She makes kueh in the morning. She's retired. The husband is resting at home in the bedroom. So this is another angle that you can see inside the house. To me, it's of course this is not exactly the apartment is. This is my imagination, and also a bit based on real. And she makes really good kueh kochi. We ordered it from her for the open studio. And across her, you can see Salja with the niece and the nephew. The niece, when I want to paint her, suddenly she disappeared, like waiting for 10 minutes. Like, where is she? You know, then she come up with all the makeup on her face. She's only 5 years old, you know. So you can see how excited they are about this thing. And surprisingly, with Indian families, they love paintings. You know, they love painting hanging the wall. The family, you see every family they have their family pictures. So by the time I finished the painting, all of them, I printed out a digital copy. I framed it up and I give it to them. They were very happy. I mean, that's the least I can do. And doggy keep barking at me after a while. I get tired, so stop barking at me. There's Gat Reese, the one that was cooking earlier. And there's Septi, it's her housemate. They're both from Indonesia, Central Java. Gat Reese is always missing her home. She's always taking, but in this case, she's reading the Quran. It's about when I was painting, so she can spend time reading the Quran, and she was sitting too long. There's Amiru, which is my next door neighbor. Young family, and his best friend is Nasrika. He's my muse. This naughty boy that you see just now helping me to paint the painting. He's the one that moved up to Bukit Jalil. And across him, there's David. He's a bank programmer. So some people say, are they very poor? Are they very... no, they're just like us. I mean, I feel at home, but I don't feel like I'm different. So that's why when I moved in to use this place as my studio, it was a natural thing for me, yeah. And David, I went to see David before Chinese New Year, which is last month or last few weeks. He told me he's less sentimental than the rest of the people. He doesn't mind moving, but he told me he feels weird in the new place because he used to live in the center, and people would walk past his apartment, you know, the corridor, and then the neighbors, they know each other for over 20, 30 years. They would always bring him some soup, some boro or whatever, because he's single. But now he moved to the new place. All the neighbors have been reshuffled, so he doesn't really know his neighbors. And he's at the corner. People that walk past his house, I think he kind of miss it. And then she said he just feel like he's coming home to a wall of four, you know, white walls, and you can see his wall is actually pink, the old one. So that's the story goes on. The story goes on. This is the finished triptych. Sorry, I added this one in much later after the opening. It was just too much work for me to finish all of this. So that's the first one, and that's the last one.
Thank you, Yong. Now we invite Dr. Ryu. Dr. Ryu will talk about his collection and how art collection can preserve our national heritage. Please.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Balai Seni Negara for inviting me to be here. I collect since 2000, and over the time it has developed to be media art collection. So I concentrate more into media and new media art more than painting and sculptures. And a lot of people ask me why and whether I still collect paintings. This is one of the topics I would like to share with you this morning regarding painting, because it's very difficult for me nowadays to find a painting that I would like to collect. Yeah, I would like to share my idea from the very basic about 400 years BCE. There was a Socrates that we all know, and he described art at that time to be imitation. So art is a copy of an object that we see in our world. And that means art was always representational, not abstract, but representational, since a long time already. And it continued until 1433, when Leon Battista Alberti, the Italian master, found the theory of linear perspective that we all have learned in the school, that all these lines ended up into a vanishing point on the horizon. It was the first time in the history of art that artists could depict the so-called visual space in a two-dimensional canvas because of the Leon Battista Alberti theory. And you see here a very famous fresco in Vatican, that all these pillars depict exactly the invention of Leon Battista Alberti linear perspective. So you see a space, a very deep room, and it was representational in 1500 still. And then in 1833, the camera was invented in French. Of course, the result was representational by Louis Daguerre at that time. And with the invention of camera, Edward Murbridge could solve the questions or fill the questions that people has been asking a long time. If a horse is running, is there any possibility that all the four legs of the horse touch the ground? Something that the human eye, the naked eyes, cannot see. So Edward Murbridge put 12 cameras in a row, and when the horse passed by in front of the camera, all the cameras start capturing the image, and he could solve the problem, or he could see that never in running horse all the feet were touching the ground. So for the first time, people realized that there was the so-called visual truth, which is what we see with the eyes, and the optical truth, that the optical truth is better than the human eyes. So that's why the truth become, usually people see truth as absolute, but it is not. So our eyes has their limitation, which can be seen by camera better. Then in 1895, cinematography was invented by the Lumiere brothers, and people could record moving image. Still representation. He recorded what the recognizable object. And shortly after that, the Lumieres put sound into it. It was an invention of the mankind. Painting should die because painting cannot move and painting cannot make sound. It was completely dead when the still camera was invented. The famous painter in France, Paul Delaroche, famously, he saw it and said, from today, painting is dead. It was 1837. But it survived until 1895, when the image started moving and make sounds like us, moving and making sound. So, Arthur Danto, the famous postmodern philosopher, called it the end of art because painting should die actually. No chance to compete against cinematography. But we all know that until today, painting still survives. The question is actually why? What happened at that time, right? So, Paul Cézanne, he lived in Aix-en-Provence his entire life and painted the mountain Mont Sainte-Victoire that we all know. And you see the houses in the painting, the houses don't follow the linear perspective theory. And Pablo Picasso, that we all know, becomes a superstar today, painted against the linear perspective theory because the linear perspective painting was seen from the view of a single person, right? So that room that we have seen, the Renaissance painting, was seen by the painter from the point of view from a single person. And purposely, Pablo Picasso painted Dora Maar, his muse and wife. This face is seen from front, and the other one is seen as if he is standing beside Dora Maar. That's why he sees the profile of Dora Maar's face. This is a breakthrough against the linear perspective from Alberti that has lasted 500 years. From 1435, it was the greatest invention, one of the greatest inventions in painting history. 500 years, the Western art was occupied by linear perspective. All you see after Alberti was following the linear perspective. And we know that with the invention of the modernist artists, the era of the so-called perspectival art has ended after 500 years. That was a breakthrough, and people were fascinated again with paintings. That camera cannot do, camera can never rebel against the linear perspective, and cinematography cannot against linear perspective. That's why people fell in love again in paintings. And then, roughly at the same time, the abstraction was introduced in the painting world. Suddenly, people painted on canvas something not recognizable object on canvas. This is even a bigger breakthrough after more than 2,500 years of representational art in the history. Because since Socrates and earlier, they all painted representational. Yeah? And suddenly, painters showed the world, wow, we are painting something that cannot be seen with camera, not with cinematography, never before by any painters in the history. That was fantastic. And yeah, so we are now coming to our era, 21st century. In 1964, Andy Warhol did a show in Stable Gallery in New York, and his artwork is, among others, the Brillo box, which is a soap pack, a box. And every American has a Brillo box at home. So, Arthur Danto came to the show, and he tried to answer the question, what is the difference between the Brillo box by Andy Warhol that is visually indistinguishable with the Brillo box in the supermarket? They look exactly the same. The material is different, but it looks exactly different. And when people say, oh, this is made by Andy Warhol is very smart, he's a genius. He said, no, I didn't make it. My factory workers, did the artwork. He purposely called his studio as factory, that we all know, so that he can say that this is done by factory workers. Because the second answer would be, it is done by an artist, Andy Warhol, that's why it becomes an artwork. And the one in the supermarket is done by a factory workers, the soap factory workers make it. And he said, no, it is done by my factory workers, in my factory. So, and if people say, oh, this is signed by an artist, Andy Warhol, and the other one in the supermarket is not signed by the artist. He said, no, I didn't sign. That's why Andy Warhol artwork, a lot of them, were not signed. Yeah, so he purposely did it because he's very smart. So, and after trying to find a lot of different answers, he failed, and he wrote an article, the very influential article called The End of Art, where he said art and non-art are visually indistinguishable in postmodern period. And in postmodern art, there are no boundaries and no definitions. And what makes an object to become art is not visible. So if I show you an object and I say, is it art? And you say, oh yes, it is art because it has a very nice color. You can see it. Or you would answer, oh, this is art because it has been carved for 2 months. Yeah, a lot of carving on it. It is art. So this is not a valid answer because what makes an object become art is not visible. So if I would say this is an artwork, so this is an artwork. So no, you cannot distinguish from normal object and art. This is the condition today. So the effect of the end of art is that in 20th century, art was divided into fine art, which has no purpose, only for aesthetic. It has a higher status. Then the non-fine art, like graphic design, industrial design, product design, or fashion design, architecture, photography. Photography was used to do documentation, has a purpose at that time, and craft. And these all, they have a purpose. There are artworks. Sometimes you come into the house, wow, fantastic house, architecture. Is it art? Oh yes, it is made by an artist. But because the house has a purpose, the architect belongs to this group, not as fine artist. So modern art, 20th century, were put into a lot of restrictions, boundaries, and definitions. They were asking what is art, what is not art, what is fine art, what is not fine art, and what is craft, and so on. It was very limited. Artists were put into straitjacket. They didn't have the freedom. And then, with the introduction of the end of art, this boundary vanished. Today, there is no separation, no definition anymore between fine art. The word fine art is obsolete. So today, everything can be art. So that's why I never ask the question, what is art? Because everything is art. The question, someone come with me to an exhibition and say, is it art? And I said, the question is already wrong. Because nowadays, everything is art. So the question, is it art, has been asked in the beginning of 20th century by Marcel Duchamp, when he produced the artwork, The Fountain, the Jules Noir. And then in 1970s by all the conceptual artists at that time. And then in 1990s repeatedly by the young British artists, Damien Hirst and Sarah Lucas and all the YPAs at that time. And this question we don't ask anymore nowadays. Instead, we should ask what nowadays is not art. The question is more interesting than asking what is art, because everything is art. So, Arthur Danto called this era again as the end of art. So painting should die, because nowadays you can produce artwork with every medium available. So I collect sound art, I collect bio art with living animals, installation, photography, performance art, video, digital moving image, video mapping, whatever, fire, smoke, water, even smell, and chemical reaction is art. There's an artist producing chemical reaction and produce a landscape painting, and so on. Everything can be art nowadays, and every medium can be used for art. So an artist nowadays has to justify why he still make paintings. So my question is actually regarding painting. After seeing the development from, let's say, Socrates era, what painting should I collect? What are the breakthroughs today? What justify the existence of painting? Because otherwise, all the artists will go into the newer medium, right? There must be a breakthrough, like at that time, Cubism by Picasso and Abstract by Wassily Kandinsky, right? Then people fall in love again in art. This is a big question for me when I see an artwork. I am asking, is it a breakthrough? If it is, I should buy, right? Then I will be a legendary collector. Yeah. And I think the answer is not abstraction, right? So, passé. It has been done at the beginning of 20th century. Because nowadays, if you look at contemporary art, the question is not why is it good, but the question is what does it mean? Because in contemporary art, the context, the meaning of the artwork or the message from the artist is primary. The visual effect is secondary. That is the reason why a lot of contemporary art looks so ugly. Just as additional information, people come to me, oh, I don't like it we use, or I don't like contemporary art. They're so ugly. Yeah, it's supposed to be ugly because we are not emphasizing in this question, but we want to convey the message and the meaning of the artwork. So, if what does it mean is more important, then no way people can convey the message by using an abstract painting. Right? So, for me, abstract painting in contemporary era doesn't have any place. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, so maybe there are a lot of abstract painters in this room that will justify and say, you talk bullshit. But at the time, at the moment, I think abstraction is not a breakthrough to justify why painting has to survive. The second answer could be Cubism, right? So I think it is not Cubism because 500 years of tradition of linear perspective, it was the task in the beginning of 20th century. We have to find something else that justifies the existence of painting. This is actually a big question for me every time I see painting. And if I find one, I have to buy the painting like Mr. Peter Ludwig, a legendary collector in Germany. He bought 180 Picasso. He is a collector, he has a chocolate company, and 90 of his best Picasso in his collection was donated to the museum in Köln. It was called Richard Wallraff, and he said, you get 90 pieces of my best Picasso, but you have to change the name into Museum Ludwig. So they did it. And there are 11 museums in the world having his name, Ludwig Museum. Just for your information, how great his collection is. Because he realized at that time, this is a breakthrough. This justifies why painting has to survive. If I would find the answer by looking at a painting done by a Malaysian artist, I will buy 180 pieces to be legendary like Mr. Ludwig. I mean, yeah. So that is another question that follow me always is 50% of the world population are born after 1989, post-89 kids. A lot of art theorists writing in their books now about post-89 art instead of contemporary art. Why 89? More than 50% of the world population. 1989 was the beginning of globalization. We know that the Berlin Wall fell down in 1989. I still live there. There was the Velvet Revolution in the former Czechoslovakia, and then the Solidarnosc movement or revolution in Poland and the opening of Hungary border to Austria, and then the Soviet Union introduced Mikhail Gorbachev to be the boss, and he introduced transparency and restructuring politics and opened Uni-Soviet to the world. And in 1989, Nelson Mandela was released from his life imprisonment. The apartheid politics in Africa ended, and the entire continent becomes a democracy. And 1989 was the Tiananmen student protest that we all know, and because of that, China becomes a superpower nowadays and becomes semi-capitalist country. And 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned, and Uni-Soviet fragmented into small countries: Russia, Azerbaijan, and Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania. It was a big country, the United States of Russia, Uni-Soviet, and then it fragmented into small countries. So all these new countries, including China and Africa, they realized that the Cold War has ended. They don't need to be pro-West Bloc or to be pro-East Bloc. So they were free. They realized they belong to the global society. They can live peacefully in this global society. And there, the spirit of globalization was born in around 89, 91 until today. So, and in 1989, the World Wide Web was introduced. That means all the babies born in 89 and younger, they were born with a computer in their hand, a gadget in their hand. Their mind is completely different than me. And these kids, they have witnessed a very fast changing of society, changing of technology, changing of anything. So nothing has a long life. So like they use Facebook. I didn't even use Facebook at that time. When I enter into Facebook, my son is already in Instagram. They say, "Oh, Papi, you're so old-fashioned using still Facebook." Yeah, and when I open my account in Instagram, they say, "Oh, it's old stuff already." You know, so they change like you all here, so most of you here, change so fast and without any problem from one technology to the next. That means you have another completely different perception about future. In our society, there are so many things that we don't find the proper vocabulary yet, but it has become history already. This is the condition we are living today. There are something happening in the world, people don't know yet how to give the name, and then suddenly it is a history because a new technology will born and people go into the new technology. So if I talk about future, in my subconsciousness, I'm thinking about 10 to 20 years. That is for me future. And these post-89 kids, for them, future is 1 to 2 years. There is a completely different perception about time and about future. And then value for post-89, for us, has strongly to do with the intrinsic quality. Also in the artwork, if we talk about art and we talk about the quality of art, for me, it's always the quality. And for the post-89 kids, it's the searchability or the susceptibility of being found, because they see an artwork and say, from who? From Liao. Instantly, Google Liao. If they don't find it, sucks. No name artist. Right? This is value. This is for them. Part of the value. That's why we were talking just now about using Instagram for the artwork. He said as if he is showing off. No, for these post-89 kids, if you don't post in Instagram or in Facebook, if they cannot find you in search engine, so you are gone. Yeah, so you don't have quality. So it is completely different in finding quality today for post-89 kids than me. So, and these kids, there were kids, when they were talking to me, we never listened to them. Oh, you're still kids, right? We don't take them seriously. And now, they are 28 years old. They finished their university degree and they become the junior boss in the company. Muhammad, right? The son from Datu Asman, and a lot of you finish your university. Suddenly, they make themselves heard. And what they say, you have to listen to them or you will be fired, right? And this is the situation. That means when over 50% of the post-89 kids, and the number is growing because 70 to 80% of the world population is below 24. You can search in the internet. Below 24 years old, 70 to 80%. Very soon, in very near future, WiiU is standing and all people around me are these post-89 kids. And there will be part of them, or more of them, will become collectors. My question is, what will they collect? Right? I'm very proud to be very cutting-edge collector. No one collect me bio art. No one collect artworks like me. And my friends of my kids, son and daughter, they came to see my collection. Wow, they were so impressed. Oh, so cool, your dad, and blah, 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 and digital art, pixel art. And then suddenly I was thinking like, oh, you have to be very careful. Suddenly, all of them standing, and they like stuff that you don't like, and you don't know it. There is drone art, there is Google Street View art in this world that I don't have it in my collection, and so on and so on. Visual reality art, and intellectual, artificial intelligence art, and a lot of other stuff. Maybe they will like it. So, big question is for me, what do they like? There will be the collectors around me, and the market will be dictated by them, because the galleries have to sell the one that they like. They don't care what WiiU likes, because the number of people in my age is shrinking. They're dying, right? So, and the future collectors are the post-89 kids. And do they like this kind of artworks? This is in my collection from Glandora Synthesis. This is made in 1994, when the first digital camera was invented. And this is the recording. It's lagging. It's 30 minutes performance, 30 minutes. You get exhausted and stressful, and it's like monster, and yeah, it's a real person. So this lady was recorded with a digital camera at that time, very new, and then the digital art was processed, cut into small segments, let's say 0.8 seconds and repeat it, and 0.7 seconds and repeat it. And she speaks normal language. The sound was recorded and also cut into small grains. And then, the fascinating effect in this artwork is that with digital processing, you create emotion. That's why if you see it in real, which is a big projection, so about 3 to 4 meter high and 25 meter wide. So if you see it and very loud, 1000 watt speaker, and then you get frightened. So really exhausted when the lady said, oh, and I can feel it. I display it in my office, and people, oh, so relieved. Yeah. So that was new in 1995, and the lady was asked, because the globalization has started, suddenly you find frightening strangers in your neighborhood. African, very dark, Arab people in your neighborhood, and Japanese, and they all speak language they thought you don't understand. That's why the sound was cut also in segments, in small frames. So this artwork deals with globalization, deals with digitalization. And another artwork in my collection is Ryoji Ikeda, a Japanese artist who lives in Paris. This white wall is numbers, digital numbers, moving numbers, very fast changing, and when the ting sound will come, and it stands still. So everything frozen for about 2 seconds. Mesmerizing. It has to do with the digital world we are living, from this room, all of you have a mobile phone and sending every second data into the world. We cannot see it. They are flying with high speed and a lot, millions of data flying in this room, and we only try to visualize how it would look like if you could see all the data in this room. So that would be what we could see. So I display it also in my office. And another artwork in my collection is bio art. This is a living mirror, 264 glass ball filled with liquid, transparent liquid, and bacteria, living bacteria, millions of bacteria in the liquid. And this camera capture the face of the lady standing in front of the artwork, and you can see her moving. The bacteria change the color according to the person in front of the mirror. Yeah, using computer and digital. This is a new media art, the so-called bio art. This is also in my collection. I collect light art I have a smoke generator in the room, and with the light, it looks like a white curtain, and if you touch, the curtain will fly away and swing. It's a light art. My question is, do they like this kind of artwork? You can feel, I'm so passionate, I feel so proud to collect such kinds of artwork in my collection. And I'm really scared that friends of my children will come and say, your dad collect Opa's artwork, right? So, I feel if it happens, I will commit suicide, maybe. Yeah. And the next question is, what will museum collect and what they will exhibit? Museum has less and less funding, as we know. The government gives the museum all less and less budget, but they have to collect more and more artwork because these post-89 kids, they get bored very soon. Nowadays, if you go to big museum in the world and they still show Damien Hirst that Dato' Asman collect, very fantastic piece in his collection. Damien Hirst produced the shark that we all know, 1991. That is 27 years ago. I was fascinated when I saw the first time the shark in front of me swimming, so huge. I mean, if you see it in your monitor, you don't feel the fascination because it's so small. If you see it in real, the shark is so big, bigger than your body, and you get frightened because the shark is gonna eat you. And if you would show a Damien Hirst to this post-89 kid in the museum, they will say ancient old, right? Because future is 2 years. It's 27 years old artwork. And they will say, what? You're showing 27 years old artwork to me? Yeah, it cannot be true. So they want to see always new one. Maybe 1 year old artwork or 2 years old artwork, but not 27 years old. I mean, this is maybe I'm wrong, yeah? So, and then, this is an A+ artwork that I gave a talk yesterday. So commercial art galleries, how can they survive with all these post-89 kids? At this moment, a commercial gallery work in selling artworks of branded artists. Let's say the gallery sell Jeff Koons for $7 million. They make a big profit, and then they do cross-subsidize. Very emerging artists. They do a show in New York, in London, in Tokyo, and everywhere. Nobody buy because the artist is no name, right? So they keep on spending money, and the money comes from the branded artists. And after 10 years, this emerging artist becomes branded. And then they started selling. And over the years, the price is increasing. And this concept, strategy, doesn't work anymore because the post-89 kids, they come and see an artwork that is shown in commercial gallery. And after 10 years, you still show it to them. And they say, God, so boring. 10 years ago I saw it, and you still show it today. So they need a new one. So and the gallery keep on getting new artists, and they cannot sell it in a high price. And if one artist is a genius artist that becomes a superstar like Damien Hirst, it lasted only 1 year maybe, yeah, right? Because they get bored after 1 year. They say, "Oh, you cannot show Damien Hirst again." So galleries can only sell artwork for 7 million for 1 year, not like today selling Jeff Koons 7 million for 10 years. Yeah, I mean, so these are all the questions that I'm asking myself, how it would be, because I have to adjust my taste to the coming generation or the coming art collectors. So, thank you very much. This is the question I want to share.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Liu. I have a question. Okay. Actually, why do you want to collect new media? Why do you want to be a new media collector, and what inspired you actually?
Yeah. When I started, I collect painting and sculpture, and then I tried to learn very systematically from the basic why contemporary art was born, what is actually contemporary art, and by reading art theory books, and I found a course that is hardly discussed in Southeast Asia, the so-called medium specificity. I realized that 20th century art was restricted only to painting and sculpture. In 20th century, artists couldn't choose other medium than painting and sculpture. This is the reason, if you see the big 20th century art books, you only find painting and sculptures. It was a dogma. So, and with the introduction of the M of art, this restriction doesn't apply anymore. Nowadays, artists can produce artworks with any material. And then I was thinking like, this is the time to celebrate my freedom. Also for artists, the time to celebrate, to take any medium to produce art. So artists celebrate, collector also want to celebrate. So I started collecting beyond painting and sculpture. That was actually the start until today. Yeah.
Thank you. It goes to Yong. Okay. The Razak mentioned recent was visited or inaugurated by Tun Razak on 16 April 1967, and after 15 years, the residential was demolished. And as an artist, what do you feel when you was there? You was there in, I think, 6 months, right?
Like I said, the first day I went home, I was only there for half a day and I cried. I suppose I feel helpless. Yeah, I mean, it's like you're seeing somebody who's dying, somebody that is wonderful, or anyone, anyone's dying, and you can't stop them. You mentioned about Tun Razak. When Tun Razak created, Bill Razak mentioned there was a reason. The reason was to bring in, was to give housing for the Kampong people, for the rural people to live in the city, because we needed a bigger workforce. That was the reason. That was 60 years ago, and people have been living there. So that reason is a valid reason for us to preserve. I actually, with the help of a few friends, proposed to the developer to keep one block. So because with architecture, you can't see it from photos. I mean, with painting, you probably could, in a way. But you need to experience the place. You go to the toilet, you go to the living room, oh, it's actually this small, or it's actually this big, and the cement floor. So we actually proposed for the developer to keep one block.
Okay, back to Dr. Liu. May I know who is the artist in your collection, and do you have a direction or to your collecting contemporary art?
So basically, I collect with the strategy of the so-called zeitgeist, that is the spirit of the time. So if you look back, if I ask you what was the art in 15th century, there is only one answer: Renaissance. If I ask you what was the art in the second half of 19th century, there is also one answer: Impressionism. So if there were artists, maybe 10,000 or 100,000 artists who didn't paint Impressionism at that time, in the second half of 19th century, those artists were forgotten from the mankind. If you read in the book, second half of 19th century art, you only find the name Edgar Degas, Monet, Manet, Renoir, Pissarro, right? So, other artists who painted others than Impressionism are forgotten because the spirit of the time at that time was the invention of camera and the invention of the paint in the tube. And people could paint it, the fascination of colors and light in en plein air, in outside air. Never before artists could paint it outside air. So it was always painted in the studio. The first time they painted landscape outside air with the light and color. So it was a celebration of their freedom to do it. So a good art has to represent the spirit of the zeitgeist. That's why everything I see in artwork, everything I read about the message from an artwork like yours, I believe it is about the urbanization. I am asking, is the context from this artist significant? Will this context be seen later on, 100 years? People will look back to our time and say, at that time, they lived with the huge problem of urbanization. Then, my artwork in my collection has to conform with the topic that we'll talk about, the spirit of the time. Yeah. So, and this is how I always analyze when I see the artwork.
Thank you. One last question to Leon after we open to the floor. Okay, Leon, you have commented the Razak mentioned memory and brought it to the very context, right? What inspired you to create crack in the wall?
I think I'm always interested in the way people live, how we shape our environment, and how the environment in turn shapes us. I mean, this is basically humanity, living in the city or living in a kampong. Not just the people, not just the building. I mean, it's this interaction. So, with Razak mentioned, it's a sheer inspiration. It's about, there's 600 people there, 15 blocks, for over so 3 generations. So I get to really see and count different count, in Pipa. So there's a Sikh temple, there's an Indian temple, there's Chinese temple, there's a masjid, there's a church right along the side, macam like the Pipa. So it's really an inspiration. It actually taught me a lot of things how to be Malaysian, because what we live now in a way is quite different, and this is still hold on to that ideal, and they're very present. I mean, they are like us, That's not that they are in a museum or whatever. So that was the inspiration that I want to capture, and just to show it to ourselves. We have this wonderful things.
Okay, we open to audience. Okay.
Dr. Wiyu tentang perkembangan seni kontemporari Malaysia dan Indonesia. Apa beza dia, ataupun tak jauh bezanya, ataupun ada perbezaan yang ketara?
Yeah. I'm not an expert in Malaysian art. I visited Malaysia not very often. Recently more because of Dato' Asman. I love his collection very much. I think you should all see his collection because you will have the opportunity to see wonderful artworks from superstars in the world in real instead of looking at the monitor. So, and by visiting his collection, he promotes also local Malaysian artists. This is the first contact with Malaysian artists. I visited also the art fair, Malaysian art fair. From what I have seen so far, I should emphasize I'm not an expert. I think Malaysian art still very dominated with paintings first, and a lot of abstract paintings, and then very formalistic. Painters emphasize on visual effect using beautiful colors, line, and texture to create the so-called significant form that touch the aesthetic emotion. That was old school 20th century artwork dominated by formalism. Cliff Bell is the art theorist that you can read. So at that time, the definition of good art is if you see a painting, you see the line and colors and structure as a space composition and texture, and then you feel, no? So touch your aesthetic emotion. This painting is considered to be good. Formalism is gone in postmodern art. And what I have seen, maybe I'm wrong, so a lot of young artists still concentrated in formalism. And in abstraction, or about abstract, I have talked about it. If I see an abstract, I just run away. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe in the future, they will see abstraction as a breakthrough, where justify painting to survive, right? And then, so my collection is crap. But it's okay. So this is my opinion at the moment. Maybe I'm wrong. So.
Any question?
Thank you to the panelists. This is a question for Leon. I think we heard earlier from the other speaker, the collector, that there's this line that's been the boundaries between fine art and the more commercial and the industrial ones have been crossed. Yeah, the boundaries are not there. In the case of Leon, I know personally that you have had a lot of previous sort of more commercial sort of experience and more industrial related sort of work, but then you return to fine art. So for you, do you feel like there's a clearer line between the things that you've done previously and what you've dedicated your time and your energy, your money and your health even to what you're doing now? Do you feel what do you think is the line for you?
My health, because in the last painting I felt sick, so I was working to. I do feel the difference because coming as an artist, when you work on different things, because and I think what Doctor just now, the other column I call it applied art. As you can see, there's an objective, so for your client or whatever is dictated by a certain objective. I suppose, but if you, as an architect, if you treat your work in such a pure way, I think, yes, it could still be art, but a lot of the time, because of the way the society is, because of the constraint of the commercial world, you have no choice but to compromise a lot, for the budget, for the client's needs and whatever. So that becomes definitely not fine art. And like you said, fine art is pure art, it's without purpose. I suppose in the beginning of my career, I'm curious about a lot of other things. And I want to try out other things, and also I need to feed myself and feed my family, and for my parents or for all my loved ones. So I work on those things at the same time. I never give up on fine arts, also called painting, also called So when I come back to it, I feel I'm slightly in a more balanced financial situation where I can do more of the things that I like without purpose, without trying to satisfy someone's will.
Can I add something? Yeah. I would like to add maybe when photography was invented, it was used to do documentation of somebody's face over the years. It has a purpose. And then there were artists in the beginning of 20th century. One is Man Ray, the other one is Laszlo Moholy-Nagy from the Bauhaus School in Germany. Both tried to define photography as fine art, the so-called fine art photography. In 20th century, you will read a lot of books called fine art photography. So they tried to capture something, maybe in detail, very artsy, right? So that was the characteristic of 20th century fine art photography. But I feel so sorry, they were not successful because the boundary between fine art or applied art was so straight that nobody can break through at that time. But these two persons has been fighting their entire life to make a fine art photography, right? So nowadays, if I meet a young contemporary photographer doing artsy photography, so with the characteristic of fine art photography of 21st century, I feel like this is an Omar doing the photography. So he must be so old, or he must have been sleeping in the school, that he doesn't realize that you don't need to produce the artsy photography to make it a fine art photography, because the boundary doesn't apply anymore, right? So you don't need to justify that my artwork is fine art photography. No need. Just make a photography and define it as contemporary art. As I said, fine art word is obsolete. Yeah? With intention and with context, with a message that is zeitgeist, right? That is significant for this era. Represent the spirit of the era. Then it will be a good contemporary art. Yeah. So you don't need to struggle and to define, I'm doing fine art photography, so blah blah blah. No need. So the major medium in the world nowadays are photography in contemporary art worldwide. Yeah. Not painting anymore, not bio art, not other art. So photography has been used the most in the world today. Okay.
Terima kasih Dr. Yu dan juga Tio Leon ya, dari Presiden Boyo mention, tapi saya tunjukkan kepada Dr. Yu tentang perkembangan dan perubahan sikap pelukis Indonesia. Kalau kita lihat Abdullah juga merantau, pergi ke Bangkok jadi pelukis istana, kemudian Afandi juga ke London tahun 50-an, Fajar Siddiq pergi ke Australia, dan mereka pulang tetap membawa identiti Indonesia. Jadi suatu ekspresionisme meledak di Amerika, kita tidak melihat garis-garis Afandi sama dengan ekspresi Barat, ya. Kemudian muncul angkatan baru setelah Black September 1974, ya. Jadi muncul Siti Adiati yang protes dengan sistem asri dan juga NTB. Dan sekarang saya melihat Arsono juga seperti apa yang Bapak bicarakan tadinya, tapi tetap menggegarkan ikonnya, dan Arsono kembali kepada kaligrafi, Chinese kaligrafi, ya. Jadi bagaimana sikap identiti itu? Ya.
Thank you very much for the very interesting question and very nice question. So I would like to start maybe from the basic in answering your questions. Actually, when the word in 20th century, the art was called modern art, modernist art. So modern bear the understanding that the people is looking to the future, to the front. I say, oh, Leong is very modern. That means I give him a new idea, and Leong say, wow, I love it. If I give him a new idea, and Leong say, oh, I'm Asian and Malaysian, your idea is not suitable for my culture and tradition. No, he is not a modernist. He is a conservative, right? So modern always look to the future. Modernists love new ideas. Always look to the future. So if you call yourself a modernist painter, it is taboo to make painting about your tradition and culture, because tradition and culture is your past. So when Afandi and Hendra Gunawan and your old masters, painter, did something with Malaysianness on their painting and talking about localness, and art professor from art historian from the Western world came and they see you are a failed artist. You don't understand what it means to be a modernist. Because a modern art has to be universal. No history, no tradition, no culture. It was taboo. So that is the reason why no Western museum collect our artworks. If one museum collected, then it was ethnological museum. When there was an exhibition, then it was in ethnological museum, not in fine art museum in the 20th century. You can check. And the guy who is writing about our art were anthropologists, not art historians, because our art were inferior at that time, according to the way how Western saw modern art, right? So, and after the 60s, there were this identity politics movement where all the minorities, the marginalized society, went to the street. They got increased self-awareness, like women fight for their gender equality. That was 1960s. Black African American fight for their right in the society. Civil movement in America was 1960s. Asian American was also demonstrated on the street, and LGBT, at that time it was called Gay and Lesbian Liberation Movement, later into LGBT. They went to the street and said, we are also human beings, there are men, women, and the middle gender, whatever they are, and we have the right to live peacefully with you, recognized by you as a human being with the same right. So all this, and all the disabled person, right? They were always at the side of the society. These minorities who didn't have the chance to decide in the society, suddenly they went to the street and fight for their right, and this increased self-awareness from the identity politics movement spread to the art world. Suddenly, we in the East or outside, so off-center, art producing regions, we realize, oh, why you dictate what is good and what is bad about our modernist art? We have our own understanding about our modernism, where Jim Supangkat, our #1 curator in the past, wrote about multi-modernism. This is an oxymoron. It's a very interesting word because modernism is always a dictatorship, seen from the view of a Western understanding of modern art. By putting the word multi, means the modernism has to be seen from different perspectives, including Malaysian perspective and Indonesian perspective. The words change, and the word is so difficult to understand. That's why in art theory books nowadays they write about modernism in Western sense, which is easier to understand. I love the word multi-modernism better because it is very artsy. And yeah, and with this movement, suddenly people realize that our modernism always have localness, right? Afandi, Hendra Gunawan, and Fajar Siddiq, and all Malaysian artists, you don't have the right and authority to judge this is bad and this is good, because the way you see modernism, so universality and originality, artwork has to be original, to be the first, then you are a good artist. So that is the Western way of looking at it. We don't follow your understanding about modernism. This is the reason why suddenly FX Laksono, Jim Supangkat, initiated the Gerakan Seni Rupa Baru in 1975, which is the start of the Indonesian contemporary art movement, right? And they bring Indonesian history, tradition, and culture into the artwork until today. It has to do with Indonesian identity. This is a big movement in the world. When I talked about it, about my collection, there were a group of collectors coming, including Mrs. Mori and Fumio Nanjo, the legendary museum director and curator. And when I talked about identity politics, and then he said, it's already 50 years. He was standing beside me and he told me, it's already more than 50 years. And then I was thinking like, old stuff. This is an old stuff, really old stuff. But it seems like the issue of how contemporary art was born because of identity politics movement is not widely discussed in Southeast Asia. Right? So that's why this old phenomenon about identity politics sounds very new for us, but it is actually old. When Harry Dono, I collect Harry Dono, I like him very much. When Harry Dono was invited to represent Indonesia in the last Venice Biennial, and he produced the Komodo, and he said, this Komodo is a Trojan horse, right? The Trojan horse which brought the Western dominance to fall. So, Indonesian artists, Komodo, come into the Western world, and at night the door opened, and the army beat the Western dominance, right? And then we win, and everybody was celebrating about Harry Dono. And I told the art director of Venice Biennials, and I said, I expect from a Harry Dono to create something more new, yeah, more significant, not about identity politics movement, which has started more than 50 years ago. I mean, it is very good, but for me, it's not suitable for a Harry Dono, right? So I expect him to explore more intellectually and more edgy. Although most of the artists in Southeast Asia, I don't know in Malaysia, but in Indonesia, haven't explored identity politics enough. So sorry, it is a little bit long, but I think it is necessary to elaborate what I think.
No. Okay, can we have one more question before I wrap up the talk? You want to say something? Please.
I just want to say Yue, but it seems like your famous being very critical.
In this postmodern and hyper world, you said that the question is not what is art rather than what is not art. So, in fact, the question is who is the artist and who are not artists? There's such thing as good art or bad art in the perspective of being a collector.
It has been done by Joseph Beuys, one of the pioneers of conceptual art in the 70s, when he was a professor in Kunstakademie Düsseldorf, also Art Academy Düsseldorf, and there were, I think, about 500 or 1,000 applications. All the young people want to enter into the art school, and then usually they have to do a test, a submission, a test, and good students will pass the exam, and then they will have the chance to study in that good university. And Joseph Beuys said, famously, everybody is an artist. And he said, everybody is accepted. Wow, that was a scandal. He was fired from the university that we know, right? He became a very famous artist in the world because of the idea that everybody is an artist or can be a good artist. And I still think that it is true. Yeah. So this is first. The question of what is good art and what is bad art is interesting because I realized that in contemporary art, the message or the context is very important, not the concept that has been very much discussed. So concept is the idea why the artist produced certain artwork, but the context is the meaning, the message, what the artist want to talk about. The context is very important in contemporary art, right? So, for me, a good artwork is an artwork that people, the viewer, the audience, can read the context without reading the caption. If you see an artwork, and independently of my cultural background, an African, American, Asian, Indonesian, Malaysian, stand in front of the artwork, and you can read what the artist want to talk about, want to tell you. So, in German they call it the artwork speak by itself, or more generally it is called contemporary art speak a global language. That means everybody understands. That is a good artwork. If you have to read the caption first, then the caption becomes the artwork, right? So, and most of the contemporary art we find in the market are contemporary art, but not a good contemporary art. There are two questions actually. Is it a contemporary art? And then you say, oh yeah, from the medium it is contemporary art, and the artist is not focusing on the visual effect, so not formalism, but instead the context, and it is beyond crossing the boundary of the definition between fine art and applied art, or whatever the definition was. And then you say, yes, this is a contemporary art. And the next question is it a good contemporary art? Right? If you read, if you can read, everybody can read, then it becomes a good one. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but this is what I have learned so far. Yeah.
If I were to answer that a little bit, I think just now a lot of the question that we raised, Dr. raised, why is Malaysia having more paintings than the other? I think what the school is teaching, I'm not blaming the school, I didn't go to the school, in art school, but the thing is, what the school is teaching us is what was past. Okay? I mean, and there's so much to read, so much to practice, I mean, you know, you have to, so, but if you're expected to create the future, but you were taught about the past, what can you do? You know, I mean, general student, and we don't have a lot of exposure here. And the question on that, in the smaller scope, for me, if we talk about art, generally we're still talking about visual arts. And visual arts against, let's say, literature, which is words. Visual arts, for me, it's what is good. I read this book, The Art of Arts, and it's actually saying what I feel is like an art that, something that makes you ache. It's that moment where you see that and you know it's going to be gone. There's a certain ache. I mean, because it's so beautiful. I mean, like a flower, like a sunset. I mean, that kind of beauty, I'm not saying as in like aesthetically, as in like it has to be beautiful, but something that is so genuine, so original, so valuable, so meaningful, and you feel it's going to be gone, it's going to be changed. That sense of, I think a lot of elusive quality is a lot of time the artist trying to capture, in my case.
Okay, thank you, both of our panel. I will wrap up the talk. Please give a big hand to our panel.